Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're diving into one of the most powerful, fast-acting tools in the entire legal system, the injunction. Now, this isn't about getting money later, it's about stopping a huge problem right in its tracks, like right now. So let's go ahead and pull that emergency brake and see exactly how this thing works.
So let's start with the big question, right? What do you do when you're facing a problem where a check in the mail, maybe a year from now, just isn't going to cut it? Some kinds of damage just can't be undone. And that is the exact reason injunctions were created in the first place.
I want you to picture this. You get home from work and your neighbor is out there building a fence right through your prize-winning rose bushes and completely blocking your driveway. You literally can't get your car out. Now you could sue them, sure, but a full lawsuit? That could take months, maybe even years. By then, the fence is up, the damage is done, and you've been stuck this whole time. You need to stop the building now.
And that, right there, is what an injunction does. Seriously, the best way to think about it is like yanking the emergency brake on a runaway train. Or maybe like a referee blowing the whistle, freezing the play right on the spot. It's a court order that just stops everything, forcing your neighbor to put down the hammer until the judge can actually sort things out.
This brings us to the key legal phrase you gotta know: irreparable harm. That's the magic password. See, an injunction is the special order from a judge that either tells someone to stop doing something, like building that fence, or it can actually force them to do something, like, say, clean up a toxic spill. And the whole point, the entire goal, is to prevent a type of harm that you just can't fix with money later on.
Okay, so you might be thinking all injunctions are the same, but nope. They actually come in 3 different flavors, if you will. You can think of it as a progression, kind of moving from a super fast emergency response all the way to a final, lasting court order.
So here's the ladder. It almost always starts with what's called a temporary restraining order, or a TRO for short. That's for the immediate emergency. If the judge agrees it's serious, that can turn into a preliminary injunction. And then the final goal, way down the road after a full trial, is the permanent injunction. Each step gets a little more serious and serves a totally different purpose.
So what's the difference between those first two? Well, here's a good way to think about it. A TRO is like the fire extinguisher on the wall. You grab it for a sudden, immediate emergency. A judge can grant one incredibly fast, sometimes without even telling the other side first, but it only lasts for a really short time, maybe a couple of weeks. A preliminary injunction, on the other hand, is like calling the entire fire department. It's a much bigger deal. Both sides get to argue their case in court, and if granted, it's designed to stay in place for the whole lawsuit.
And that brings us to the grand prize of this whole process, the permanent injunction. This is not a temporary fix. This is the final judgment from the court, and it only happens after you've gone through a full trial and won your case. This is the order that says, hey, that harmful thing you were doing, you have to stop forever. Okay, so these things sound powerful. How in the world does a judge actually decide whether to grant one? Well, I'll tell you, it is not easy. The person asking for the injunction has to survive what's often called the 4-factor test. And trust me, it's less of a simple checklist and more of a brutal gauntlet you have to fight your way through. So here's the gauntlet. First, you have to convince the judge that you're probably going to win the main lawsuit in the end. Second, and this is a big one, you have to prove you'll suffer that irreparable harm we've been talking about. Third, the judge does this balancing act. Who gets hurt more if the injunction is or isn't granted? And finally, the judge has to ask, is granting this actually good for the public? You got to win on all 4 points. No skipping.
Let's just zero in on irreparable harm for a second, because this is almost always the factor that makes or breaks the case. It means an injury that once it happens, it's done. There's no going back. Money can't bring it back. You can't just fix it. This is really the heart and soul of any argument for an injunction.
Let me give you a perfect example to make this crystal clear. Imagine someone is about to bulldoze a magnificent 200-year-old oak tree on your property. No amount of money in the world can replace that specific tree. That is classic irreparable harm. Now, what if someone just owes you $10,000? Well, that's just a financial problem. It can be fixed later with a check. That is not irreparable harm. See the difference?
Oh, and there's one more practical catch, a financial one. If a judge actually grants your request, they will almost always make you post a bond. You can think of it like a security deposit. You're putting up a chunk of money that's held by the court just in case it turns out later that the injunction was a mistake, and you cause the other person to lose money for no good reason.
All right, so this isn't just some dusty legal theory stuck in a textbook. Injunctions have been at the very center of some of the most important moments in history, and believe me, they are still shaping our world today in huge, huge ways.
Let's talk about the famous Pentagon Papers case. Back in 1971, the Nixon administration literally went to court to get an injunction to stop the New York Times and the Washington Post from publishing a secret classified history of the Vietnam War. I mean, the stakes could not have been higher. It was a direct clash between national security and freedom of the press.
And the Supreme Court's decision was a landmark. They refused to grant the injunction. They ruled against something called prior restraint, which is basically the government trying to censor speech before it even happens. The court said that stopping someone from publishing is one of the most serious things you can do to the First Amendment, and the government just didn't have a good enough reason to do it.
Now let's fast forward a bit. A much more recent case in 2008 called Winter v. NRDC actually raised the bar for getting an injunction. The case was about environmental groups who got an injunction to limit the Navy's use of high-powered sonar because they argued it might be hurting whales and dolphins. This one went all the way to the top. And what the court decided changed the game. They ruled that it's not enough to just show that harm is possible. To get a preliminary injunction now, you have to prove that irreparable harm is likely to happen. That one-word change from possible to likely made getting an injunction significantly harder.
So, where's the big fight today? It's all about something called nationwide injunctions. This is where a single federal judge in one state issues an order that blocks a whole government policy across the entire country. Supporters will tell you it's a critical check on a president's power, but opponents, they argue it's massive judicial overreach, letting one judge basically set policy for the whole nation. It's a really fierce ongoing debate.
So where does all this leave us? Well, we have this ancient legal tool with roots that go all the way back to medieval England, and now it's facing brand new 21st century problems. You know, how do you use an injunction to stop a deep fake video from going viral when it spreads in seconds? How do you freeze stolen cryptocurrency that's designed to be untraceable? As our technology creates new kinds of harm, this powerful old emergency brake is going to have to adapt, forcing our legal system to evolve right along with it.